Welcome, folks, to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. I hope you're doing awesome today. My guest is Michael Yinger, who is the COO and Co-Founder of Resume Sieve. Michael, what's happening today?
You know, it's a lovely day in the Carolinas. Happy to be talking to you, Anthony.
Me too. I took a look at your software. I'm so curious about it, but what stood out to me most was like your body of work over, I want to say 20 plus years. I don't know how much plus it is. And how I assert that all of it has built to this place where you said there's a big opportunity and problem in the market, and I think I can fix it. But why don't you tell our listeners about some of the organizations you've worked with, some of the cool stuff that you've done in your career, and then we'll jump into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You should frame it that way because it's certainly the way I think about it. I'm in the probably the third major career over my life. You know people who've done the same thing or been with the same company their whole lives. I have gone where opportunity has taken me. So I spent many years in transportation, and then I was in consulting, and now for the last couple of decades I've been in talent acquisition. And through a series of progressive roles, that's what led me to the point as a result of COVID. Thank you very much. Sometimes you need a boot. And that's what COVID did to me. It gave me a little boot to get out and be willing to try something a little different, which was to work on a startup. And it has been an interesting experience over the last couple of years, and learning experience, doing things I'd never done before. You know, you think after 35, 40 years of working that you've done everything in your life, but that's just not true. It's amazing the new things that you can be presented with. And that's positive. It gives you a chance to grow and be productive. So I've had a good time over the last couple of years.
Got it. So in the previous roles that you've had, so I say Aon Hewitt, Randstad, People Scout, a couple other kind of name brands. What were some of the big lessons that you learned or problems that you needed to solve in your role? Because it looks to me like the implementation technology piece, but also in the people space, but then you've also done a lot of stuff in service delivery. So what are some of the key, like in those multiple careers, what are those lessons that you've learned that you'd like to share with our leaders today, or our listeners?
Well, there was a change in my career about 18 months into People Scout. I was at Aon Hewitt just before People Scout. I was in charge of global client delivery. And so that meant I was servicing clients at 17 accounts and 650 people that were supporting those accounts. And then I went over to People Scout. I was doing basically the same thing. And then the CEO came to me and said, you know what, I'd like you to run sales. And I said, really? I've never done that before. Never been in a sales role, never owned sales. And she said, all the things that you've done, all the conversations that you have, I think you could run sales. And so that's what I did for the last 2.5 years that I was at People Scout, was global sales. What that says to me is that the experiences that you get build towards you having the capability of answering that call. People, my kids come to me, my older kids come to me and say, oh, should I do this? And I said, well, is it new? Are you going to learn something from it? And that's the way I've approached these opportunities. It's been when I made the transition from transportation, where I was in charge of logistics for a shipping company. So that just shows you the early part of my career. And I went from that into technology consulting because I had a penchant for technology, and so I had paid attention to how technology worked, and an opportunity came up and they said, would you like to come do this? And so suddenly I'm leading engagements around building websites and adding technology to companies where before I'd been worried about where's the container, where's the train, is the ship going to dock on time? So life is a series of opportunities that build on themselves, and it's just been my approach to pursue those as they came up. We've got a fairly broad interest level, and that's how things have worked. And it certainly led me to where I was at People Scout, and the experience I had at People Scout managing different functions all at the same time really led me to being part of Resume Sieve, where when I first joined, they asked me, I was hired in as the CEO. They asked me to come in and run the company, and I've taken a slightly different role lately. And the idea was, not only did I have the industry experience, but I had done all these other things. I'd had sales, I'd had implementation, I'd been in charge of product, and it was a chance to bring all that together. And that's what my career has been, finding, looking for ways to plug in those experiences and put them to use.
So if we take just the most recent experience and the balance between leading sales and leading service delivery, what are the similarities in terms of strategy and leadership and leading people? And what are the differences? Do you find that the experiences are more or less the same, just a different hat? Or is there significant considerations that shaped how you approached your day-to-day that were different?
I find them to be very similar. This is something that particularly grew out of my consulting experience. I was an internal consultant for many years at a transportation company, and that's what led me into external consulting. The kind of things that are the same are how you manage your people, how you keep track of your work, the use of metrics. Now, there may be different metrics, don't get me wrong. One of the things that I recognized when I came into the, I was in the outsource space in talent acquisition, right? Those are very much like consulting engagements. It's a project, there's a product, there's a revenue flow, there's a P&L that goes along with it. It's recognizing those patterns and being open to using the skills that you've already got versus, thinking, this is completely different, so I've got to be learning something completely different. I've never approached life that way. This is how I see this as similar, and trying to make use of what I've already done, what I've already learned, and to put that in place. And it means being a little more open in your mind about how you approach an opportunity, and a willingness to take on something that you might say, this doesn't look like me. If again, sales and service delivery, it's managing your people, it's managing your numbers, it's focusing on the customer. You're just at a different point in the life cycle. It's still those basic tenets are the same. And if you can make those kind of connections, then it gives you a lot of flexibility to be able to move around and do different things. It opens up some avenues to you that might not otherwise be available. I mean, who would think? I was leading client delivery, and all of a sudden I'm leading sales. Well, it's because I was open to the possibility, and I could see how to apply myself in a different way.
Yeah. And I think, like, we talk a lot about innovation. We interview a lot of people in innovation. We don't talk to so many young leaders and new leaders. And so in my experience, I've tried to get like compound interest on learning, do a bunch of stuff so that I can take what I like, leave the rest, and build a body of work. What I hear about your success, especially in this kind of third stage of your career, is, being open is the key. Being able to take what you can take and learn from it, but also build a foundation that helps you grow and develop, not just as a cog in the machine, but as a person who's living life and having these experiences, that your ability to be open and to leverage what you know and not kind of put yourself into a box has made it possible for you to, as you mentioned earlier, live a lot of places, but have a lot of experiences. But at the heart of that, foundationally, it's leading people, it's managing projects or portfolios, and tracking performance is just, where you fit in the whole process or life cycle of the particular organization you're at. But fundamentally, you're leading people no matter where you're at, and you're using your body of experience, knowledge, and work to drive that forward. Is that fair to say?
Oh, that's absolutely it. There's another element to what you said that occurs to me as you were going through that. There have been a couple of times in my career where, because of circumstances, I've had to perhaps what people might consider take a step back. So, for example, in 2002, when the tech bubble burst, I was in technology consulting. I was head of client delivery for a consulting firm that specialized in technology, primarily for web companies. And so I was out the door. I got to lay myself off because I was the head of operations, and the CEO said, "By the way, put your own name on the list, and we'll see you later." Okay, great. That was a fun experience. And so I went out and started my own company. What I was doing was project management. I had 250 people reporting to me who were on any number of different projects, right? But I just went back to running projects as a solo contributor and built up a small business. And eventually my biggest client hired me, and that started my path through the talent acquisition space. So that's the kind of thing there are times when life will present you interesting challenges, and are you open to being creative and doing the work that's necessary to continue to move forward. Giving up wasn't an option. I had a house and a wife and 2 dogs and 2 kids and cats. Giving up isn't an option. It's find another way to make things move forward. And so that's what I did, and it paid off for me, and I've been I think I've been happy for it, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it definitely highlights that resiliency and saying, hey, you don't know how long the journey is going to go, and you never know where it's going to turn out, but you just got to keep swimming. So a fun question I like to ask is, what is a moment in your career, and you highlighted one, where you totally got your butt kicked? Like, you learned a really good lesson. You're like, ooh, I won't do that again. But it would, that lesson that could be shared with our listeners today that they can take on and build on their careers. Anything like that come to mind other than having to fire yourself?
Yeah, that's an experience that not many people will likely have. One thing, my management style, the way I tend to be, is very open. I tend to, some might say, over communicate, but I want my people to know what's going on, even if it's not fully baked, if it's just something that's still in the works. And there have been a couple of times where I know I've stepped over too far. I've told them too much, and at one time I actually ended up somebody leaving because of it, and that's the wrong, that's not what I was trying to do. I just wanted to make sure everybody sort of understood where we were going and where we might go, right? The more the more effective you can be. So there's a balance when it comes to communication. I think people that people follow, which is really what a leader is, right? A leader is somebody that people will follow, are good communicators. And if you're not effectively communicating with your people, then they're going to be looking for somewhere else for their inspiration, and maybe even leaving because they don't find what they like with you. And it's a balance. It hasn't changed me. At the time, it didn't feel good, but it hasn't changed how I've been from a communication perspective. Because I think that's the way to deal with people, is to be as open as you can, so that they understand really what they're dealing with. Because at one point I had a couple of people working for me, and I won't describe much about the circumstances, other than that they worked in a cube together but back to back, and they would email each other rather than talk. And you can't exist. You can't get anything done. It was malicious obedience. That's the way I characterize the way these two people worked. They did exactly what they were told, exactly when they were told to do it. Nothing more, nothing less, but nothing more. How are you gonna get that sort of extra that comes from synergy? I had one CEO when I was involved in an M&A operation, and the CEO said in a chit chat moment during the management presentation, that the way he judged whether or not this was a good deal was 1 + 1 = 3. And that's the kind of thing that you got to give people the space to go beyond and effectively grow with you. I mean, you touched on innovation. That's where innovation comes from, right? If people have not only empowerment but also enough understanding of what's going on to be able to think about creative solutions to whatever it is, right? There is another way to do it. There's another piece of software you could use. Maybe there's a different client that you could talk to. If people don't understand beyond just do this job on a day-to-day basis, well, you don't get that. You don't get that extra bit that comes out of a good, well-run organization.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I was Googling today, I was doing some search engine research, SEO research, which is, anyway, trying to find more queries about what people were trying to figure out in terms of leadership capacity. So as part of our programs, we have implementation programs where we do our strategic planning, But then we also try to layer in the capacity for leadership to work together to exactly create that 1+1 = 3, not just, hey, I'm doing my work in my silo, but how can we collaborate? How can we stay aligned? How can we, work together? So my question to you is, in your tenure in these organizations, and you obviously had large teams, what are, 2 or 3 things that you put in place to support development, not just at the top, but within that kind of like middle manager or like key leader? Like they might not necessarily have the title, but you knew that those were high impact players and you wanted to get the most out of them. If you have any stories and anecdotes without kind of giving away any secret sauce.
Yeah, no, I was happy to give away that secret sauce. There are a couple things that come to mind with that. The first is you want to encourage people to look beyond their day-to-day job, to take some time and do some self-development. And I mean, quite frankly, I've been in situations where, in conversation with a person, they really wanted to be a chef.
Hmm.
Great. Why are you working here? You're not going to get to be a chef working here. If that's what you really want to do, I will support you in how do you achieve that and make that transition. The other thing that I do consciously, and it's often difficult for organizations to deal with, you've heard the expression square peg in a round hole, right? What people don't often think about is they think, well, that means that somebody doesn't fit, right?
Hmm.
Well, but think about what happens when you shove a square peg into a round hole. Well, the peg gets hurt, but so does the hole, right? And so organizations that think about only people who fit, you start to lose that opportunity. And so another thing that I have done consciously is I've often, within the parameters of what I was doing, created a job that was really unique to the person who was doing it, because they just brought something to the table that made them valuable and allowed them to contribute. And yeah, it may mean that we had to reorganize a little bit, or we had to shuffle some things around, but the idea that you can only have certain things that fit. That's tough for organizations to deal with, especially today, where true talent is so hard to find. When you got such a mismatch between jobs and job seekers, right? Where there's so many more jobs than there are job seekers, and it's even worse when you consider that a lot of the jobs that are available are flipping hamburgers, and how many people are really looking to flip hamburgers? I'm using that as a metaphor, of course, but I was talking to a CEO the other day. He posted a COO job part-time for a startup with very little funding. He got 1,000 applicants. So, you got to be creative. How are you going to get through 1,000 applicants, for one thing? But, what are you looking for? How's somebody going to fit into that kind of an organization? There's always times of opportunity. And I think we're in a great time of opportunity if you're willing to stretch yourself. And, so it's not only up to the leader. That's the other thing that's critical, right? There is, I spent a little bit of time, it doesn't really show up on my resume, but I spent a little bit of time selling insurance for one of those kind of companies, right? I was in between things, and again, doing nothing is not an answer. So I was selling insurance. And one of the things that I took away from that experience is there's only one person who cares at all about your career. You look at them every day in the mirror, right? Maybe your spouse too. So we'll say that. And if you've got one, your dog, it probably cares. It's on blow, right? But that you got to own that. You got to own the fact that you're the one who's in charge of your career, and so that means thinking about how can I add some value, or it's not just up to the boss. Although I made it my business to help people expand themselves, it's also what can I do to make myself more valuable. It's one thing for me to say, look, you can have time, and let's talk about how much, to do some self-development. Well, you have to go do it, right? It's not just enough for me to say, I will support you in doing that. You got to go do that work. And so there's a give and take in that kind of thing. Irrespective of what the leader wants to do, the person still has a role in what's going on in their career.
Yeah. So I like, that was quite a bit of stuff. So to take that back is, as good leaders want to get the most out of their people, making sure that you figure out both the talent that you need and not just like the role that you need, because you can find great people that will adapt to the talent. And so my next question is, how do you sort through that, which is probably a good segue into what you're doing now. But really like being adaptive, because the talent piece, I think those X factor pieces is when you can really maximize the benefit of the person. And I don't say like exploit, because you could interpret it that way, but really saying, hey, you've got these skills and attributes, you've got a special set of skills that we use. I was thinking the other day, I'm like, well, like, why am I good at what I do? And I was like when I was younger, I fundraised. Like I sold chocolates, I sold flowers, I sold that stuff to like raise money for other people. But I'm like, damn, like I got pretty good at asking people for stuff and asking people for money. But you won't find that on my resume, but it's buried deep in that in terms of what I can bring to the table. So what I heard, and I believe one of the reasons you've been successful, is because you allow people to bring the most of themselves to the table, because you're willing to look at that versus, hey, I just need somebody to do the job. And it sounds like that was one of the keys to you being a good manager, a good leader, and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, I think that's that. You've done a good job of synthesizing that, Anthony. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, you made it easy. So put a posting out. I know some people aren't as lucky where they don't have people that apply. And the flip side is they've got a gajillion applicants, and how do you sort that out? So maybe we can plug your company a little bit. Tell me about Resume Sieve. Tell me why it's important for people, and what do you see the future of talent being?
Sure. Okay. There's some good questions there. Resume Sieve today is we've got a tool today that's part of our long-term platform strategy. The tool today allows the recruiting professional, and in the US anyway, 50% of the jobs are filled by an HR generalist, not by a recruiter. So these are people whose job is not full-time recruiting. So what's the one thing you can do for these people? Give them some time back. And so one of the most time consuming portions of the recruitment lifecycle is resume evaluation. Now you see the stats, people only spend 8 seconds on a resume. I'm sorry. I get that. What that means is they're not really doing a good job evaluating the resume, because in 8 seconds, maybe you get the name and the city and the company they work for today, but you sure don't get into the nuance of how long did they work there, what did they do, what kind of work were they doing, what kind of skills did they have that brought to bear. So Resume Sieve allows you to take the resume, as it sounds, bring it into the system, and then evaluate it against your criteria, and then we return it with a score, so there's rank ordered. Now, what then comes next is then you can do some what ifing. So you've got 100 resumes, you put them in, and they come out in the order they come out in. You say, what if I decided that I really don't need somebody with a college degree? Let me take the college degree criteria out, and now let me resort them, all virtually instantaneously. Nothing is instantaneous, but it's pretty fast. And a very common problem is you go to your hiring manager and you say, okay, here are the 5 people I found, and the hiring manager says, but what if? And then you're stuck, because then you have to go back and look at those other resumes that you looked at before, because probably the 5 don't have it, which is why the hiring manager asked the what if question. With the Sieve, all of that is fully automated so that you can more effectively evaluate what's going on. Now, it operates on a standalone basis if that's the way you do your recruiting, or we're integrated with 4 of the large applicant tracking systems: iCIMS, Greenhouse, Bullhorn, and Zoho, and others to come, but those are the ones we're integrated with now. So that you can actually take your job and take your resumes out of the ATS automatically, and then put them into the Sieve and do your evaluation. Because the nice thing, nice for us, those systems don't have good ways of evaluating. It's still up to the user to evaluate. So whether you got 100 resumes on the screen or you got 100 resumes on a stack on your desk, either way, you're going to spend some time effectively evaluating them. And by the way, if you actually evaluate 100 resumes, honestly, are you looking at number 59 the same way you looked at number 1? I challenge you that's just not possible.
Yeah.
And by the way, you got 2 resumes. This one is chronological. This one is project oriented. Well, how do you evaluate between the two of those without spending a lot of time digging into the comparison? So again, this is the point behind Resume Sieve is to really streamline the evaluation and ranking of the resume, which by and large there's some tools that talk about it. A lot of them rely on AI. We have an AI component, but our AI component really helps read the resume because these resumes are all different, right? It's how do you pull apart and come to with a consistent set of information about each resume. That's what our AI does. So it's not skewing the analysis of the resume itself. It's pretty exciting stuff that we're working on, I think.
That's awesome. Well, one other thing, I think it's a very cool, having hired two people on our team, shout out to Arnold Nelma. What's up, guys? That I think is very cool about that. And I'm going to take, for our listener, for you, the listener, Michael's experience over 20 plus years of having to sort through that and to have to develop talent. Of course, some people show up. And what I think is really cool about the tool, not having known really a lot about it prior to today, is the intent behind it. The intent is to try to balance the playing field, to be able to say, hey, here's what we're really looking for, to try to remove as much subjectivity as possible so that candidates have probably a more balanced playing field, so long as they're meeting the requirements that are set out, which I think from a candidate perspective, it would probably begin to limit people who just apply for any and all jobs that happen, because they're already going to get filtered out, and try to really customize those resumes, even in a competitive market, to be able to put yourself forward, but then also allows the hiring manager to be able to say, hey, here's what I'm really looking for, and here's kind of the secondary capabilities, so I'm not limited by X decision criteria and potential snap judgments, which I hope will help bring diversity to teams, because then you say, yes, we got the skills, but then, hey, like, let's measure them on their extra things that are beyond the job, which is exactly that body of work that we talked about. So that's a cool thing. I'm really excited for what it could do for the industry, what it could do for people. And yeah, that's awesome. Anything else you want to share?
I just appreciate the chance to be in the conversation. I think that there are a lot of opportunities out there, and you just hit on one that I've talked about from time to time with other folks. You got to consider each job uniquely. If all you're doing is seeing the job and throwing the same resume against it, then you're going to get the same result which you got from the last one that you did. Companies want to know that you're considering what it is that they're asking for and whether or not you actually have it before you say, I can do that job. You may think I can do this job, but if the one thing that represents you, your resume or the application that you fill out, doesn't demonstrate that you can do that job, then you're not likely to be taken seriously. So it's people have asked me, well, how do you beat the machine? Well, it's not really beating the machine. It's making sure that you actually demonstrate that you've got what the company is asking for, because that's the first gate you got to get through. If you can't get through that gate, then you won't be able to talk about all the other stuff.
Yeah.
So think about that as you search for a job.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a game, folks. You just got to know how you're being scored, and then you play the game, which is the same thing as going back to what we talked about. Hey, the KPIs, whether it's a sales game, a service game, a marketing game, a people game, it's just all a game. You just got to know the rules. You got to know the score, and you got to play to win. So, yeah, Michael, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you today. Where can people connect? Where can they learn more about Resume Sieve? Where can they learn more about the awesome artwork you have in your office?
Yeah, absolutely. ResumeSieve.com on the web. We're also on LinkedIn and Facebook. I'm Michael at ResumeSieve.com. Easy to get me by email. I'm also on LinkedIn, Mike Yinger, and Facebook. Feel free to connect, and we could have a conversation.
Fantastic. Michael, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here today. I just really enjoyed our chat, and thanks for bringing all of your experience to the table today.
Thanks for the opportunity, Anthony. It's been a good conversation.
Well, my pleasure. So, folks, my challenge for you today is to take a longer view on your career forward, and then also take a view backwards and to say, hey, what are those intangibles? And to challenge yourself to say, hey, what is that next opportunity? And how can I bring what I do have to the table, even if it's not necessarily explicitly there right away? but make sure you do the minimum. You got to let people know what you can do. So I appreciate you watching today. I hope this helps you in your career, whatever level you're at, your first, second, third, or other career. And I just appreciate you listening. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you being here. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now, everyone.